So this is a little chart. We have a much larger map. So some of the data we looked at, the real estate transactions. I think it was in 1983 that they started taking real estate.
89.
Do you want to talk about this?
I kind of wonder how that really began, because I recall at the demonstration project program back in the 90s, interesting story. I don't want to go too long, but there was a proposal to have half-acre and one-acre parcels to be rezoned to be developed in 1.5 acres, and that appealed to about 70% of the landowners, not in a very good way. The planning commissioners approved that at that time. However, the commissioners, the board, did not, because of the fact that it was obviously affecting the community in a bad way. But one of the issues that I approached was the well testing data that was done through the real estate transaction. I was really concerned about that nitrate level, because we have never had experienced, I'm a realtor, that the nitrate was ever that bad. So I went down to the laboratories at that time, which was down here on 97. They allowed me to go through their files, nothing. I contacted the Department of Health Services at that time, because they collect the data and they're to record. And they apologized to me and said, look, Bill, we do not have any recorded information. It's all in boxes. They did not have the funds. And that, as a report at a testimony, and you can imagine Lapine High School State, their gymnasium was filled with people, that it was like a shock. And so I tend to kind of wonder if that study more or less kind of started at that particular time. And then I knew that the DEQ. So, and I know that the real estate transaction study is kind of a negative to the county as well as the DEQ, the state, and a lot of it has to be with how that well has been sampled, and the fallacy is that the realtor is taking those tests, and that's not true. Maybe in the late 90s and the very early 90s, excuse me, the late 80s and the early 90s that may have occurred, but definitely not in recent times, because there's too much liability there. Now, whether that well sampling is being passed on to the Department of Health Services at this time by every agent, I can't tell you that for a fact. But it is the bank that is housed majority of any well data, and you can kind of look at it with one eye open and one eye closed, but it still has some legitimate information there. And if you were to look at the data on a area-wide basis, the medium rate is quite low. So I'll just leave it at that, and if you want to talk about something else regarding well data later.
Okay,
maybe.
yeah. So what's on the, we have a map of the whole area, and this is just one little piece of it. I think it's the Burgess Road area. And basically the dots show where there's been a well test or multiple well tests. And if it's blue, it means it's really, it's got less than 1 milligram of nitrate. So we just said, well, that's no detect. There's really nothing there. And then if you, and it's kind of hard to see. Oh, green 1 to 3, got it here. Red, yellow 3 to 6, orange 6 to 10, and red was 10 and above. And so when you look at that, even from a distance, you can kind of see that there's some areas where it's not all blue. There's some areas that have a lot of green and a little bit orange and yellow. And so these are places, so this area demonstrates some nitrates in the well test water.
When you test a well for a real estate transaction, who gets that information? Is that specific for the health department, or is it water resources department? Because I know that community wells or water systems have to provide their testing for so many years to water resources. They don't seem to report it to the health department. So I'm a little confused as to where this data goes and whether this data is different from community wells.
Yeah.
Well, during a real estate transaction, in your contract there, it indicates that the seller is to have that well tested.
Right.
It's not a requirement for the purchase of the property, but it is a policy in which has to be conducted. And then from that test, by a third party, which is a water specialist, they go out, and then the seller representative, the realtor, receives that report, and it's up to them to transfer that report to the buyer's agent, and so both the buyer and the seller have that information. Then from there, it's to go on to the Department of Health Services, and then it's up to them to do the recording. Now, I see where a problem has occurred that could probably solve a lot of our problems, is that and I've really addressed this a long time ago, is that the Department of Health Services, the DEQ, and the real estate agencies need to hook up together and kind of work this out. And this way, I think it will be a much more cleaner slate in which to work from and to really understand the data. And so everybody gets on board. You're not going to hear the DEQ complaining about this and that. And then as far as the actual sampling, it's got to be done and understood in the right manner.
Right. Thank you.
One problem with the real estate test data is, in my neighborhood, Newberry Estates, all the wells are over 100 feet deep. So it's not that I'm not contaminating with my septic system, it's just that my well test data will never show that I'm contaminating because it's a pressurized aquifer that we're drilling into. So it'll never get contaminated by the groundwater, so it gives you a false impression that there's no issue there, but there possibly could be once my septic waste gets to first water and starts to travel. So the real estate data isn't a perfect picture of what's going on there.
I mentioned earlier when we said what we call first water. Your first water can be anywhere from 10 feet to 50 feet to 60 feet. For example, the wells that were contaminated in Klamath County, they were 40-foot wells. You have 40-foot wells in Deschutes County, too. Let's face that. The amount of spray was very little. But the pitcram happened to be a manufactured chemical that was developed for the Department of Defense. They used it in Vietnam. You mix pitcram with 2,4-D and you get what they call Agent White. That wasn't, the state gave it to the county as a herbicide to use for noxious weeds. However, the herbicide said not to be used in rapid draining soils or shallow groundwater. There was where the negligence was. But it can come from anyone, and it can come from any other herbicide. Part of our recommendation is that we want to see monitoring done on that first water so that we don't have this idea that, well, our wells are good, they're deep, we don't have a problem. But what happens is there's somebody in your neighborhood that has a shallow well, and that's the one that's going to get it. Okay.
Could I point out one more thing here?
Sure.
In relation, and the reason I want to do that is in relationship to the wells that were tested for that particular purpose. The DEQ did a great thing. They also took a nitrate test. Okay, and there were 56 wells. Now we're talking about the criteria, the density, and I will be the first to say that the greater the density and the more development, you're going to increase nitrate. However, when the question becomes is the magnitude. Okay, Jason Churchill made that point very clear. It's the magnitude and how that affects the public health. I reviewed the nitrate study in which these wells were taken, and we're talking about shallow wells, we're talking about high density, and we're talking about homes that 1965, there's a home.
Yeah, 1960s, yeah.
Over 40 years, several homes, and the median was 0.996. Okay, so if you understand what I'm saying, the state nitrate level is 7 milligrams per liter. The federal is 10, okay? So here you have a subdivision, Jack Pine Village, very older subdivision, with shallow wells. How do you explain it? I don't know, but that's what it states. And that's where I like to be at, in terms of the factual numbers in which the public, the people will understand. When it gets into the science, you start confusing people. But I don't like to deny science. I just like a little reality set in, and I think it'll be easier for the government agencies and the public to begin working together.
Okay. Any other questions about the